The mid-afternoon sun bathed the freshly paved streets of Silverwood Meadows in a golden glow. The kind of picturesque perfection Elijah Carter had envisioned when he decided to uproot his family for a new start. This neighborhood, with its tidy lawns and white picket fences, was supposed to be a haven. A place where he, his wife Maya, and their 2 children, Sophia and Miles, could leave the chaos of city life behind and finally breathe. Elijah stood in the driveway, hands on his hips, surveying the moving truck as it pulled away. The house behind him, a charming 2-story colonial with navy blue shutters and a bright red door, already felt like home. "Looks good, doesn't it?" he said to Maya, who stood beside him holding a clipboard, her hair tied back in a loose bun. "It's perfect," she replied with a smile that carried a mix of excitement and exhaustion. "But I hope we're ready for this. New house, new neighborhood, new schools. It's a lot for the kids." "They'll be fine," Elijah said, his voice steady. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "This is the fresh start we needed." Sophia and Miles burst out of the house, chasing each other across the front yard. "Tag, you're it," Sophia squealed, her curly hair bouncing as she darted away from her younger brother. "Mom, can we check out the park after dinner?" Miles asked, his wide, toothy grin melting away Maya's worry. "Of course, sweetie, after we unpack some of these boxes." The Carters' first weekend in Silverwood Meadows was spent settling in and preparing for a housewarming barbecue. Elijah loved to grill, and the idea of inviting neighbors over to introduce themselves seemed like the perfect way to start building relationships. By Saturday afternoon, the backyard was buzzing with energy. The smell of ribs and burgers filled the air, mingling with the laughter of children and the gentle hum of music from a portable speaker. Maya had set up a buffet table with potato salad, fresh fruit, and homemade brownies, while Elijah manned the grill with his usual confidence. "Thanks for coming, everyone," Maya said, greeting a middle-aged couple who had wandered over from 2 houses down. "We're so happy to be here." Not everyone shared the Carters' enthusiasm. Across the street, Margaret Worthington peered through her lace curtains, her sharp eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. Margaret had lived in Silverwood Meadows for over 30 years. She prided herself on maintaining the character of the neighborhood. And to her, the Carters represented something different. She muttered to herself as she counted the number of guests. "This is supposed to be a quiet neighborhood, not a place for loud parties and strangers coming and going." Her irritation grew with each passing moment. When a burst of laughter carried across the street, Margaret had enough. She picked up her phone and dialed 911. Elijah had just set a plate of burgers on the table when he noticed the flashing lights of a police cruiser pulling up in front of the house. The cheerful chatter of the party quieted as everyone turned to look. Maya appeared at his side, her brow furrowed. "What's going on?" Elijah wiped his hands on a towel and stepped toward the driveway, his calm demeanor masking the unease rising in his chest. A young officer, no older than 25, stepped out of the car and approached him. "Afternoon, sir. We received a noise complaint about a disturbance in the area," the officer said, his tone polite but firm. "A noise complaint?" Elijah repeated, his brow furrowing. He gestured toward the backyard. "We're just having a barbecue. It's a family gathering, nothing wild." Before the officer could respond, Margaret emerged from her house, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "That's them," she called out, her voice sharp and accusing. "They've been playing loud music all afternoon. This is a respectable neighborhood, and we don't tolerate disruptions." Elijah took a slow, steady breath. He had dealt with people like Margaret before, people who made judgments before knowing the full story. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "this is a family barbecue. The music isn't loud, and we've been respectful of the neighborhood. If there was an issue, you could have spoken to us directly." Margaret's lips tightened into a thin line. "I shouldn't have to. You should know how to behave in a neighborhood like this." The officer, clearly uncomfortable with the growing tension, stepped between them. "It seems like everything is under control here," he said, glancing at Margaret. "I don't see any violations. Let's all try to get along." Margaret huffed, her face red with frustration. "This isn't over," she muttered before turning and storming back into her house. Elijah watched her go, his jaw clenched. Maya touched his arm gently. "Let it go," she whispered. "We know who we are, and that's all that matters." Over the next few weeks, The Carters began to notice subtle changes. The friendly waves from neighbors became less frequent. At the grocery store, Maya overheard whispers and saw pointed glances directed their way. Sophia came home from school one day. Her usually cheerful face clouded with confusion. "Why won't Sarah sit with me at lunch anymore?" she asked. She said her mom told her not to. Maya's heart ached as she knelt down to hug her daughter. "Sometimes people don't understand what they're doing, sweetie, but that doesn't mean you've done anything wrong." Miles, too young to fully grasp the situation, became quieter. Elijah noticed him retreating to his room more often, his Lego sets forgotten in the corner. The final straw came one morning when Elijah found a note taped to their front door. Written in blocky, anonymous letters, it read, "Follow the rules or leave." Elijah sat at the kitchen table that evening, the note lying in front of him like a glaring accusation. Maya stood behind him, her hands on his shoulders. The house was unusually quiet, the kids having gone to bed early after sensing the tension in the air. "This is getting out of hand," Maya said softly. "We moved here for a better life. But it's like we're walking on eggshells every day." Elijah nodded, his jaw tight. "We're not going anywhere. I didn't work my whole life for someone like Margaret Worthington to scare us off. But we need a plan." Maya pulled up a chair next to him, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe we start by reaching out to the neighbors who've been friendly. If they're on our side, it might make Margaret's influence weaker." Elijah's lips curved into a faint smile. "You've always been the smart one." The next day, Maya took the lead. She knocked on the door of Clara Bennett, the kind older woman who lived a few houses down and had brought them cookies when they first moved in. "Good morning, Maya," Clara said with a warm smile. "What brings you by?" Maya hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "Clara, I need to ask for your advice. We've been getting some pushback since the barbecue. I'm worried about what people are saying." Clara's expression darkened. "It's Margaret, isn't it? She's been like this for years. Anytime someone new moves in, especially someone she doesn't think fits her idea of the neighborhood, she stirs up trouble." Maya nodded, her throat tight. "We don't want to cause any problems. We just want to live our lives and be part of the community." Clara reached out and patted Maya's hand. "You and your family belong here just as much as anyone else. I'll talk to a few of the neighbors. Not everyone agrees with Margaret's nonsense." Over the next week, Clara's efforts paid off. A few neighbors stopped by to chat, offering small words of encouragement that felt like rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds. One evening, Brian, the young man who lived across the street, knocked on their door. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner," Brian said, shifting uncomfortably. "Margaret's been making a lot of noise, but most of us don't feel the way she does." Elijah shook his hand firmly. "Thanks, Brian. It means a lot to hear that." Little by little, the Carters began to feel less isolated. Sophia made a new friend at school, a girl named Lily whose parents invited her over for a playdate. Miles found a soccer league in the community center, and Elijah even struck up a conversation with a fellow dad during practice. But Margaret wasn't done. One morning, Elijah opened his mailbox to find another note. This one read, "We'll never accept you here. Leave before it gets worse." Elijah's hands shook as he crumpled the paper. He brought it inside, showing it to Maya. "This is harassment," he said, his voice low with anger. "I'm reporting this to the police." At the local precinct, Elijah sat across from Officer Daniels, a middle-aged man with a kind face who listened intently as Elijah explained the situation. "Do you know who left the note?" Daniels asked. Elijah shook his head. "No, but I have my suspicions. Margaret Worthington has been making our lives difficult since day one." Daniels sighed. "I know Margaret. She's been here for decades. And she likes things her way. But a note like this? That's serious. I'll open an investigation. And in the meantime, I'd recommend installing some cameras around your property." Elijah nodded, feeling a flicker of relief. Finally, someone was taking this seriously. That evening, he and Maya ordered a set of security cameras and began planning their next steps. "If she's going to keep targeting us, we need to show her we're not backing down," Elijah said. The next major confrontation came at a neighborhood association meeting a few weeks later. Margaret had called for the meeting, citing concerns about maintaining the character of Silverwood Meadows. Elijah and Maya knew it was a thinly veiled attack on their family. The meeting was held in the community center. a modest building with rows of folding chairs set up in the main hall. The Carters arrived early, sitting near the back as neighbors trickled in. Margaret stood at the front, her posture stiff and her expression smug. "Thank you all for coming," Margaret began, her voice dripping with authority. "We've all noticed some changes in the neighborhood lately, and I think it's time we address them." Elijah clenched his fists under the table, but Maya placed a calming hand on his arm. "Let her talk," she whispered. "Then we'll respond." Margaret went on, listing complaints about noise, traffic, and disruptions to the community's values. Though she never named the Carters directly, everyone in the room knew who she was talking about. When Margaret finally opened the floor for comments, Clara was the first to stand. "Margaret, with all due respect, I think you're out of line," she said firmly. "The Carters are good people, and they've done nothing to deserve this treatment." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room, some in agreement, others hesitant. Brian stood next. "I live across the street, and I can tell you the Carters are some of the nicest neighbors I've ever had. This isn't about noise or traffic. This is about prejudice." The murmurs grew louder, and Margaret's face turned red. "Prejudice? How dare you?" Elijah rose to his feet, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Let's talk about what this is really about," he said, his tone calm but commanding. "My family moved here because we believed this was a community that valued fairness and respect. But from the moment we arrived, we've been treated like outsiders. We've been judged, whispered about, and harassed, all because we don't fit someone's idea of what this neighborhood should look like." The room fell silent as Elijah's words sank in. He looked around, meeting the eyes of each neighbor. "We're not going anywhere," he said firmly. "We belong here, just like anyone else, and if anyone has a problem with that, they can come talk to me directly." By the end of the meeting, it was clear that Margaret's influence was waning. More neighbors came forward to voice their support for the Carters, and Margaret left in a huff, her plan to rally the neighborhood against them having backfired. In the weeks that followed, the Carters noticed a shift. Neighbors who had once been distant now waved and stopped to chat. The kids were invited to birthday parties and playdates. At the next soccer game, a group of parents cheered for Miles alongside Elijah and Maya. Elijah and Maya knew there would always be challenges, but they felt a newfound sense of belonging. They had faced adversity with strength and grace, and in doing so, they had shown their neighbors and themselves what it truly meant to be part of a community. The weeks after the town hall meeting brought a mix of relief and cautious optimism. While the Carters had earned the respect of many in Silverwood Meadows, they knew there would always be people like Margaret Worthington who clung to old prejudices. Still, the family focused on the positives: new friendships, the kids' growing confidence at school, and a renewed sense of purpose. Elijah took to heart the responsibility of fostering connections in the community. He started volunteering at neighborhood events, often using his weekends to help with cleanups, fundraisers, and even mentoring programs for local kids. His years as a coach in his old neighborhood proved invaluable, and soon, several parents approached him to start a weekend soccer program for children in Silverwood Meadows. The first practice was held on a sunny Saturday morning at the local park. Elijah arrived early, setting up cones and goals while Miles helped carry equipment. To his surprise, more kids showed up than he'd expected. Parents lined the sidelines, many of them watching nervously but curiously. "All right, team," Elijah called out with a grin, clapping his hands. "Let's see what you've got." The children responded eagerly, laughing as they kicked the ball around and tried their best to dribble through cones. As the practice went on, the parents began to relax. Elijah's warm, approachable demeanor put them at ease, and by the end of the session, several parents stayed behind to thank him. "You're really good with the kids," one mother said, smiling as she watched her son run off the field. "This is exactly what our neighborhood needed." Elijah nodded, feeling a sense of pride. "It's my pleasure. I'm happy to help." While Elijah built connections through sports, Maya found her place in the community by joining the PTA. At first, she was hesitant. She had never been one to enjoy school politics or navigating the cliques that often formed among parents. But Clara Bennett had encouraged her, pointing out that Maya's voice was exactly what the PTA needed. The first meeting was awkward. Maya could feel the weight of judgmental eyes as she walked into the room, carrying a notebook and a pen. But as the discussion began, She quickly realized that many parents were simply looking for someone to step up and take action. When the PTA president asked for suggestions on how to improve the school's arts program, Maya raised her hand. "What about hosting an art fair?" she suggested. "We could involve local artists and give the kids a chance to showcase their work. It could even double as a fundraiser." The idea was met with murmurs of approval. And by the end of the meeting, Maya found herself leading the art fair committee. She spent the next few weeks reaching out to local artists, organizing volunteers, and brainstorming ways to make the event special. The kids, especially Sophia, were thrilled to be part of the planning process. On the day of the art fair, the school gym was transformed into a vibrant gallery. Paintings, sculptures, and photographs lined the walls, and the sound of children's laughter filled the air. Maya watched with pride as parents admired the students' work and artists gave live demonstrations. "You've done a wonderful job, Maya," Clara said, patting her on the back. "This is one of the best events we've ever had." Maya smiled, feeling a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in months. "Thank you, Clara. I'm just glad the kids are having fun." Despite the progress the Carters had made, Margaret Worthington remained a thorn in their side. Her whispers had grown quieter, but her disapproval was as sharp as ever. She avoided direct confrontations, but her glares from across the street and the occasional passive-aggressive remark at community events made it clear that she hadn't changed her mind about the Carters. Elijah and Maya did their best to ignore her, but one afternoon, Margaret took things too far. As the kids played in the yard, Margaret approached the property line, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice cold. "Your children are making quite a bit of noise. Some of us enjoy our peace and quiet." Elijah, who had been trimming the hedges, looked up and took a deep breath. He walked over, keeping his tone calm. "They're just playing, Mrs. Worthington. It's a sunny day, and they're enjoying themselves. They're not doing anything wrong." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "This neighborhood has standards, Mr. Carter. Perhaps you should teach your children to be more considerate." Maya, who had been watching from the porch, stood up and joined Elijah. "With all due respect, Mrs. Worthington, our children are just being children. They're not disturbing anyone." Margaret's face flushed, but before she could respond, a voice called out from across the street. "Give it a rest, Margaret." It was Brian, standing on his porch with his dog at his side. "They're good kids, and you're the only one who seems to have a problem with them." A few other neighbors, drawn by the commotion, stepped outside. Clara waved from her garden. "Leave them alone, Margaret. We've had enough of this." Margaret looked around, realizing that she no longer had the support she once commanded. With a huff, she turned and marched back to her house, slamming the door behind her. Elijah and Maya exchanged a glance, relief washing over them. It wasn't just their voices anymore. The neighborhood had spoken, and Margaret's influence was finally waning. As the seasons changed, so did the Carters' place in Silverwood Meadows. They became an integral part of the community, hosting events, volunteering their time, and forming lasting friendships. Sophia and Miles thrived at school, and Elijah and Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, Miles looked up from his plate. "Do you think Margaret will ever like us?" he asked innocently. Elijah chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. "Some people don't like change, buddy, but what matters is that we stayed true to who we are." Maya smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze Elijah's hand. "And because of that, we've built something real here." The Carters knew there would always be challenges, but they also knew they were strong enough to face them. Together, they had turned a rocky start into a home filled with love, laughter, and acceptance. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Over the next few months, the Carters continued to immerse themselves in Silverwood Meadows, working to strengthen the connections they had forged. Maya found herself stepping into more leadership roles, not only in the PTA but also as a member of the Neighborhood Beautification Committee. Her efforts brought life to neglected spaces in the community, organizing tree planting days and revitalizing the local park with fresh flower beds and picnic areas. Elijah, on the other hand, focused on mentoring the youth in the neighborhood. His weekend soccer program had grown exponentially, with more children signing up each week. Parents who were once hesitant to approach him now praised his ability to inspire and connect with the kids. One Saturday afternoon, as Elijah wrapped up practice, A boy named Connor lingered behind. He was a shy kid who had only recently joined the program and often kept to himself. Elijah crouched down to meet his eye level. "Good game today, Connor. You're getting better at passing." Connor hesitated before speaking. "Coach Carter, can I ask you something?" "Of course," Elijah said, smiling. "What's on your mind?" Connor fidgeted with the hem of his jersey. "Do you ever feel like people don't want you around? Like no matter how hard you try, you don't fit in?" Elijah's chest tightened at the boy's question, the weight of his own experiences flashing through his mind. He placed a reassuring hand on Connor's shoulder. "Yeah, I've felt that way before. But you know what? What matters isn't what other people think, it's what you think about yourself. As long as you stay true to who you are, the right people will see your worth." Connor nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Thanks, coach." As the boy ran off to join his parents, Elijah watched him go, realizing that the impact he was making extended far beyond soccer. He was helping these kids find their confidence, their sense of belonging, something he had fought hard to achieve for his own family. At school, Sophia had become a quiet leader in her own right. After seeing her parents navigate challenges with strength and integrity, she felt emboldened to stand up for herself and others. One day during lunch, she overheard a group of girls mocking another student, a girl named Emily who was new to the school and struggled to make friends. Sophia clenched her fists, remembering the times she had been the target of whispers and stares. Taking a deep breath, she approached the group. "Hey, leave her alone," she said firmly. The girls turned to her, their expressions a mix of surprise and annoyance. "Why do you care?" one of them sneered. "Because it's not right," Sophia replied, her voice unwavering. "Everyone deserves to feel welcome here." The girls muttered something under their breath before walking away, leaving Sophia and Emily alone. Sophia turned to Emily, offering a warm smile. "Want to sit with me and my friends?" Emily's face lit up. "Really? Thanks." As they walked to the table together, Sophia felt a sense of pride. She had made a difference, just like her parents had taught her. Despite the progress the Carters had made, Margaret Worthington remained an obstacle. Though her influence had waned, she continued to stir trouble in quieter ways, from filing petty complaints to spreading thinly veiled insults during community meetings. But one day, the neighborhood's patience with Margaret reached its breaking point. During a council meeting to discuss plans for a new playground, Margaret once again took the floor. "I just think we need to be cautious about who we're attracting to our neighborhood," she said, her words dripping with implication. "We don't want to lower our standards." This time, however, the community wasn't having it. Clara Bennett stood up, her voice firm. "Margaret, enough. We've heard this kind of talk from you before. And it's not welcome here. This neighborhood is about inclusion, not exclusion." Several other neighbors murmured their agreement. And Brian chimed in. "The Carters have done more for this community in a few months than you have in years. Margaret, it's time to let go of the past." Margaret's face flushed, and for once, she had no retort. She gathered her things and left the meeting in silence, her hold on the neighborhood finally broken. With Margaret's influence diminished, Silverwood Meadows began to truly flourish. The changes the Carters had brought, both tangible and intangible, had inspired others to step up and contribute. The art fair Maya had organized became an annual event, and Elijah's soccer program expanded to include other sports, creating a vibrant hub of activity for the community's youth. Even the once divided neighbors began to come together, hosting block parties and potlucks that brought people of all backgrounds to the same table. The Carters had become a cornerstone of Silverwood Meadows, their resilience and kindness leaving an indelible mark on everyone around them. One evening, as the family gathered on their porch to watch the sunset, Maya turned to Elijah. "Do you remember how hard it was when we first moved here?" Elijah nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, but look at us now. We didn't just find a place to live, we built a home." Sophia and Miles sat nearby, laughing over a shared joke. The warmth of their laughter filled the air, a testament to the strength and love that had carried them through every challenge. As the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Elijah wrapped an arm around Maya's shoulders. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Maya leaned into him, her voice soft but filled with pride. "We have, and the best part? We're just getting started." Over the following months, Silverwood Meadows began to thrive in a way it never had before. The neighborhood, Once a place of quiet suspicion and division, transformed into a community that celebrated its diversity and strength. The Carters had not just moved into the neighborhood, they had become the beating heart of its renewal. It was a sunny spring afternoon when the Carters decided to host their biggest gathering yet, a block-wide community cookout. Maya and Elijah had spent weeks planning every detail, from the menu to the entertainment, wanting to bring everyone together in celebration of the neighborhood's progress. The yard was alive with activity. Tables laden with dishes from every culture lined the driveway, showcasing the rich diversity of the community. Kids played tag on the lawn while adults mingled, their laughter and conversation filling the air. Sophia had organized a talent show, encouraging her friends and neighbors to share their skills. Miles, always the entertainer, had planned a comedy routine and was practicing his jokes under his breath. As the crowd grew, Elijah stepped onto a makeshift stage in the backyard. With a microphone in hand, he looked out at the sea of smiling faces and felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his deep voice carrying over the crowd. "When Maya and I moved here, we had no idea what kind of journey we were embarking on. We faced challenges, some expected, some not, but we also found something incredible. We found all of you." The crowd cheered, and Elijah's smile widened. This neighborhood isn't just a collection of houses. It's a family. And like any family, we've had our ups and downs. But what makes us strong is the way we come together. The way we support one another. That's what makes Silverwood Meadows special. Maya joined him on stage, holding a glass of lemonade. "Here's to new beginnings, to growth, and to all of you who make this place what it is," she said, raising her glass in a toast. The crowd echoed her words. Glasses raised high as cheers filled the air. Though most of the neighborhood had embraced the Carters, there was one person who had stayed away from the festivities, Margaret Worthington. From her living room window, she watched the gathering, her face unreadable. For months, she had resisted the changes happening around her, clinging to the past and her perception of how things should be. But as she watched neighbors of all ages and backgrounds come together, she began to feel something she hadn't felt in years: loneliness. Margaret had spent so much energy pushing people away that she had isolated herself in the process. Later that evening, when the festivities were winding down, Margaret did something unexpected. She walked across the street to the Carters' home. Elijah was carrying chairs into the garage when he saw her approach. "Mrs. Worthington," he said, his voice cautious but polite. "Good evening." Margaret hesitated, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I wanted to say thank you," she began, her voice faltering, "for what you've done for the neighborhood. It's better now, and I suppose I owe you an apology." Elijah raised an eyebrow, surprised but not unkind. "You don't owe me anything, Mrs. Worthington, but I appreciate you coming over." Margaret nodded, her gaze dropping to the ground. "I didn't want to see it at first, but you've made this place better. I was wrong about you and your family. I just thought you should know." Elijah extended a hand, offering her a small smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Worthington, that means a lot." She hesitated for only a moment before shaking his hand. Then, with a small nod, she turned and walked back to her home. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was a start, a sign that even the hardest hearts could change. As the months turned into years, the Carters continued to leave their mark on Silverwood Meadows. Elijah's youth programs grew into a full-fledged community sports league, bringing together families from all over the neighborhood. Maya's leadership in the PTA and local committees inspired others to step up and take active roles in shaping their community. Sophia became a role model for younger kids, her courage and kindness setting an example for others to follow. Miles, with his boundless energy and humor, brought joy wherever he went, making friends with kids and adults alike. The neighborhood itself flourished. New families moved in, drawn by the sense of unity and belonging that defined Silverwood Meadows. The once isolated community became a beacon of hope, showing that even the most divided places could find common ground. One evening, years after their first arrival, the Carters sat together on their porch, watching the sun set over Silverwood Meadows. The air was warm, and the neighborhood was alive with the sounds of children playing and neighbors chatting. "Can you believe how far we've come?" Maya asked, her head resting on Elijah's shoulder. Elijah smiled, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it. Every challenge, every setback, It's all led to this. Sophia, now a teenager, sat nearby with Miles, who was sketching something in a notebook. I'm glad we stayed, she said, her voice thoughtful. This place feels like home. Miles looked up, grinning, and I'm glad I have the best porch for drawing superheroes. The family laughed, the sound mingling with the evening breeze. In that moment, they felt the weight of everything they had built, not just a house, but a legacy of love, resilience, and community. Years later, people in Silverwood Meadows would still talk about the Carters. They would remember how Elijah and Maya brought people together, how they stood strong in the face of adversity, and how their courage inspired an entire neighborhood to be better. The Carters had taught Silverwood Meadows an invaluable lesson. That community isn't about where you come from or how long you've been there. It's about the connections you build, the kindness you show, and the strength you bring to those around you. And in the heart of Silverwood Meadows, the Carters' story would live on, a testament to the power of family, perseverance, and hope.